Good evening. Welcome to another of our exciting episodes, Intentional Loving. As always, my husband and I are happy to be sharing with you some life-changing tools on how to build your relationship.
And tonight we want to talk about money in the marriage, joint or separate accounts. See, traditionally, when a couple gets married, they merge their money along with their lives. For example, that may mean taking or shared responsibility for paying bills or for developing joint saving goals. It can also mean combining their paychecks or other recurring income, such as tax refund and cash gifts from the wedding, into one single bank account.
Yep. For many couples, a joint bank account is the ultimate symbolic gesture of their financial union. But that does not mean it's a system that works for all couples. In a 2016 TD Bank survey, 76% of couples said they shared at least one bank account. That means roughly a quarter of couples kept their finances separately. Surprisingly, millennials were the least likely to be in favor of sharing bank accounts compared to older generations.
And so, whether you're newlywed or you're in a long-term relationship, deciding how to manage your bank accounts should be a top priority for you. Weighing the pros and cons of all the options that can help in making a decision. So we want to talk about the benefits of, first of all, the benefits of a joint bank account. And we would like to hear your views. We'd like to hear your thoughts on if you believe that a joint bank account works or keeping your money separately. Because every couple, based on their own circumstance, their realities will be different and your decisions will be based on your realities. But let's talk first about the benefits of having a joint bank account.
Yeah.
So having one bank account offers a number of benefits. For example, sharing an account allows each spouse access to money when they need it. A joint bank account usually provides each account holder with a debit card, a checkbook, and the ability to make deposits and withdrawal whenever they need funds. And so if your bank provides that facility, each of you would also have online access to account information and the tools which can simplify paying bills and other shared financial tasks, for example. And so some legal affairs can also be streamlined with a joint bank account. In the event that one person passes away, for example, the other spouse will retain access to the funds in the joint account without having to refer to a will or to go through a lot of the legal system to claim money. And you worked in the banking industry and you are familiar sometimes with how these things happen. So depending on the country you live in or the local laws of that country, the surviving spouse may have to go through a lengthy legal process to claim money that may be in separate accounts. And so finally, one of the main advantages of having a joint bank account is that there's a smaller chance of encountering financial surprises when all the money comes into one account that both persons can see. And so married couples with joint accounts may find it easier to keep track of their finances because all expenses come out of that one account, and it makes it harder to miss any kind of account activities such as withdrawals and payments, and it's easier to balance the checkbook at the end of the month.
Yes, absolutely. Drawbacks of a joint bank account is, while sharing a bank account can simplify your money management systems, some couples may feel a loss of financial independence with a joint bank account, especially early in the marriage, right? With separate bank accounts as well, each spouse maintains an individual degree of freedom over their finances. One major drawback to sharing a joint bank account is that it can cause issues in the marriage when spouses aren't communicating about their account activities. So it can create struggles
challenges
when you're not talking about what you want to do with the money.
Right.
You just pick yourself up and go and do something and spend some money on something that you didn't discuss and didn't agree on.
Indeed.
And then, that's one of the drawbacks with the joint bank accounts. But
And yeah, I think those are some of the challenges that impacts, because money is a major issue
yes, in relationships.
in relationships.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, we talk about some of the challenges that impacts on marriages, and we talk about sex being one of them. A few months ago, you and I talked about what happens sometimes when they are unmet
Needs.
needs in the relationship, particularly where sexual fulfillment is concerned.
Yeah.
But sexual fulfillment is not just the only issue that impacts on the health of the relationship. Money and how money is
major.
handled and managed.
Yes, it's a major
And
factor as well.
yes, indeed. And there are times in the relationship, and you and I have had this conversation in times past also, where there are times when one person may have a priority, or they perceive it to be a priority, and so monies can be spent because it is there. And so one person is not able to, if you have joint separate bank accounts, one party is unable to be able to manage and monitor what's happening with the
other
finances. So if you have a joint account, it is easier, I think, for a communication to develop, because you both are aware. Because one person can't have a child somewhere that they are supporting, and the other party does not know. When you have a separate account, you know, you can very well be taking care of a family in another jurisdiction,
But remember,
and your spouse is not aware of it. Yeah.
remember, we're talking about the drawback of having a joint account
Yes.
and not your separate account. So if you're taking money out of the account, means I'm seeing it, because
Right.
both of our names are on this account, and anyone can check it at any given time. And if you didn't discuss anything with me about spending money from the account and the purpose for the spending,
Yes.
then I see that, and then we'll have to discuss it.
Absolutely.
So what we're saying is that the millennials prefer to have it separate, so that they do what they want with their money when they want.
And
you
there's a
have to
certain
give an answer.
and there's a certain degree
for
of
this one.
certain
Yes.
degree of independence,
Right.
certain degree of freedom that they have to spend as they please without having to give an account to the other person.
Yeah.
So problems may also arise when one spouse enters the marriage with financial indebtedness. For example, one party may come into the relationship with student loans, credit card debts,
Yep.
alimony for taking care of another family, or so forth, child support, or other debt that must now be paid
Yes.
from that joint
that
funds.
joint
And so
funds, yes.
you may have a situation where one party comes into the relationship and they bring all of the debt that they used to have, student loans,
Yeah.
alimony, child support, all of these things, credit card debt. And so when you have a joint account, now all of the resources from the two persons are going into this one account. One person has a huge debt to service,
Yes.
and these things can happen. So resentment
Yes.
builds up in the other person,
Exactly.
because they now have to take on the responsibility of paying the debt
Paying your debts.
that the other person comes into the relationship. And I tell you why that's a challenge, because sometimes if you have a conversation about these things before you get into the relationship or marriage, then you know what you're buying into.
Right.
But sometimes what happens is the persons don't talk about finances
Exactly.
before they get into the marriage,
Right.
and then, oops, I didn't know that you have all of these
this
debt.
yes. Or sometimes they may have spoken about it, but one person is not honest. Right?
Yes,
We
yes.
have that happening as well, where persons aren't honest, and they paint such a good picture of themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and then when you get into the marriage, then the real person is unveiled, and the
Yes,
issues
yes.
that this person come with, the baggage.
Yep, and then
is
you
unveiled.
realize
the curtain comes down, and
all
you
of this
see
debt.
everything, So
Yeah. So let me hear your thoughts about, your own views on the kind of approach that you think works,
Yeah.
joint account, separate account. And so, to avoid getting into these kinds of money arguments, couples should discuss their separate debts in detail. We talked about that before deciding on which kind of banking works for them.
yeah,
And so a joint account can also be problematic if the relationship ends.
yeah,
If you have a joint account, and then, we don't start out thinking that the relationship is going to end. We don't start out with the plan that a relationship is going to end.
Yeah.
Most persons, when you get started, we are excited, we're optimistic, things are going to go great,
Yeah.
We love each other. But you do have those realities that there are times when with all of the commitment that we have to the relationship, there are times when it may still end. And what do you do when the relationship ends and you now have to
Joint
deal
funds.
with a joint account? And so if the couple decides to part ways, then the funds in a joint account can be messy to separate.
Yes.
How much is mine? How much is yours? Because usually when you are having a great, a good marriage,
Yeah.
you don't keep account of this is my money, your money.
Right.
There's usually a, very openness about, well, it's all ours. So we put the money in there. And then when you have to decide on separating the funds, it becomes a problem. So each spouse has every right to withdraw money and close the account without the consent of the other. Usually when you have joint account,
That's how it works, right?
That's
You
how
have
it
to
works.
Consult the other person to do anything,
Right.
including closing.
yes.
But I think you can set those instructions when you open the account, even
Right.
though it may be a joint account. You can set the instructions as to how this account is going to be managed.
Right, in terms
and
of how
you
it can be
agree
closed.
on how the monies will be used, how much, if you wouldn't exceed a certain amount, and all of that stuff. So
Right.
there are things you can put in place, even if you have a joint account, to kind of safeguard yourself against a possible breakup or separation.
Right.
So you can have, you can come up with some ground rules and instructions that you leave with the bank regarding how the funds are to be used and when and how much, and in the event of a separation, how the monies are to
Will be
split.
separated.
And definitely not that one person can have the opportunity and the power
empty the
to
account.
close or empty the account, but that maybe
Yeah.
both persons have to come into close, stuff like that.
Indeed,
You can have
indeed.
those things
Yeah.
made. Those
And so
rules,
I think
regulations made up.
one of the things that happens sometimes, particularly in Christian marriages, is that we really, because in every marriage, but more so in Christian marriages, there's a greater degree of trust,
Yes.
because we believe that the other person in the relationship is going to be responsible and they're going to act in a manner that will not expose us financially. So we usually don't think about some of these
Those
eventualities.
yes.
And while I believe that we must trust God and believe God that He will preserve our relationships and protect our marriages, one has to also be mindful of the fact that individuals at times are influenced
Yes.
by powers that are not Christ-like and godly.
Yes.
And there are times when we can start out very well in a good, solid Christian marriage, and one person begins to allow himself to be influenced by the God of this world and act in a way that is harmful to you and contrary to the promise that they have made and the commitment they have made as to how they will conduct themselves in the relationship.
Yeah.
And by virtue of that, you can very well find yourself at the end of a year, 2 years, 5 years, 20 years, having given of yourself, built a life together with someone, you can find yourself dispossessed
Yeah.
and left out in the cold. And so it's important to ensure that even as you are planning financially, that there are certain things that you agree on
Yeah.
as you are building your marriage and building your relationship. You must have an agreement on what are the parameters and the boundaries as to how we are going to manage our finances. Not that we're planning for a divorce or we're planning for a
Right.
breakup,
Yeah.
but let's ensure
Or
that
even
we are,
Loss of
or loss of the relationship.
our life.
Yeah, so I would really love to hear your thoughts and your views on this. We have some great people online with us tonight. Love to hear your thoughts and your views and so forth. So, as my wife was saying, whenever you set up an account, it would be very useful to ensure that whatever safeguards they are there, that you discuss them and look at how the bank can also, and financial advisors
Institutions, yeah.
can provide the kind of support that you need.
Yeah. To,
All right,
yeah.
to ensure that you are making solid decisions. All right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So using separate bank accounts, you must examine the benefits and the drawbacks of all the options. This will help lay aside any strong financial foundation and ensure that each spouse in the relationship is secure.
Yeah.
Couples who revisit their decision ever so often, and it's important to do so, may also find success by making sure their strategy still works for them.
Yes.
So it's important, even as you know, come up with the safeguards
Yes.
or the boundaries or whatever,
Mhm.
that you know, you're checking at it, you're looking at all the options, looking at some possible things that can happen,
Right.
and you can revisit your strategy. Is it working? Is this okay? You know, but at the end of the day, trust is a very big factor in the
Absolutely.
relationships. And even if you have separate accounts, like we established earlier, which safeguards you against, you know, being abused financially by your spouse.
Right.
But in the case of, you know, separation or more so loss of life,
Loss of life,
you
yes.
have a problem accessing those funds, unless maybe I'm thinking you can probably have a power of attorney
Yeah.
given to your spouse, that in the event of your death,
Yeah.
they
Or a
have the
will.
power
There's usually a
to
will.
withdraw. The will usually still takes time to
Okay.
process. And you know, sometimes you need those funds to get stuff done right away.
Yes.
But if you have a power of attorney, sorry, you take that into the bank, and it may not state close the account, but you can withdraw, you know,
Yeah.
as much as, and leave just a minimum balance, stuff like that. But then trust is still a factor,
Trust is
because
important. Yes.
you know. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So it boils down to trust,
Yes.
and you know, being able to come up with the best scenario that works for you and your relationship.
Right. So if you and your spouse prefer to keep separate bank accounts, you should have a discussion with your spouse about it early in the marriage,
Yeah.
as early as possible, to establish a financial plan
Yeah.
for the future. If you decide, look, it may be good for us to have separate bank accounts, have that conversation. Have that conversation. I think sometimes people make the assumption that, okay, you don't trust me, so we're beginning on a foot or a foundation of mistrust. Sometimes you just have these very practical and important discussions about money
Yeah.
and how it is managed. Because I can tell you, it becomes a very sore issue when you don't have the conversation, but there are these unexpressed expectations. And then when persons begin to act, particularly, let's say there's a tension begins to develop in the relationship, and the first thing that happens when tension begins to develop in the relationship is that you notice that your spouse begins to make withdrawals from the account. That's an indication that they're
Yeah.
trying to protect themselves.
Yes.
So I think what's important is that if you are going to have separate accounts, there must be an understanding. Look, we're going to have a joint account. Maybe this will take care of our bills. We have our shared bills coming out of being serviced by this account.
And then we
But
have our separate
then there's
account for
a separate
savings.
account that you can have maybe for savings, or a separate account that you can have for contingency or whatever it is.
Yeah.
All right. But that must be a conversation. Having separate bank accounts does not take away the responsibility from either spouse. You still need to work through how bills are going to get paid,
Yeah.
who will be responsible for paying what, and how frequent, and have a frequent discussion
Yeah.
to reconcile your accounts and finances. And so you might also still need to choose to keep one or two accounts, such as a joint savings, to save towards specific financial goals like a vacation or pension or retirement, or you know, that retirement home or whatever it is you're saving towards.
Yeah.
All right.
Absolutely.
So that's so important.
Yeah, so married couples can choose to maintain separate accounts and also open a joint account in which, and I think you just alluded to that,
Yeah.
in which they both put their incomes, which help to deal with the bills. This way, you both enjoy the benefits of a joint account while you still maintain the independence of a divided income in terms of your own finance being kept
All right.
separately. So
Absolutely.
you still have a degree of control, but then for taking care of the financial responsibilities, you have a joint account in which you both contribute,
Right.
right? That helps as well.
Absolutely. So I want to go to maybe one or two comments and see if we can get a response. So one person says, I think it's Nigel says, do both spouses have access to each other's account? And if not, that could be a problem. Yeah, well, that too is a challenge. If, for example, there is you have a separate account, I have a separate account. I think the question Nigel is asking is,
If you can have
do you have
access
access
to
to
mine
mine and I have access to yours?
Well, I think the reason why it's separate is so that we don't have
We don't have
access, right?
Yeah. I think you're going to have a challenge in a relationship where there isn't an understanding as to why you would prefer that your spouse not have access. So if we have an understanding that, look, there are times when you, because you know me, for example, there are times when if I think that something is important and I believe that it's urgent, I'll go buy. I'll buy it because I think it's important. And there are times when, from your perspective, it could wait. I believe if there isn't an understanding in the relationship regarding this is the tendency you have. I know, and in order to protect ourselves as a family, there's going to have to be an account that you will not touch.
Right.
I believe that there are times when those a very frank and honest conversation needs to take place. And we need to be honest with ourselves. If you know that you are an impulsive spender, if you know that you just go out there and you spend because the money is there, and the spouse in the relationship understands those tendencies, then you have to trust that spouse that the decision not to give you access to that account is to safeguard the family, to safeguard you, and to safeguard the family.
Absolutely.
Now, I think there must be a conversation. I would be okay with you saying, this account, you're not touching it. I'm not giving you the PIN. I'm not giving you any access, but I know the account exists. I think the challenge really is if the account exists
and you don't know,
and the spouse does not know that the account exists. I think in that context, there's going to be some degree of betrayal. And I think that's where the problem is, because if the account exists and it's a secret account and the spouse is not aware of it, it's a sense that you are withholding information. There's no disclosure, and that's where the problem is. But I believe if the account exists, but there's an agreement that this account exists, but you're not touching it, and this is the reason you're not touching it. This money is for our retirement. This money is towards our children's education. Once there's that understanding, I believe that it creates a health. So, Nigel says joint accounts require more discipline and more discussion. I totally agree. Totally agree. More discipline and more discussion. All right. Fiona says a joint account for the marriage needs. That's a good one. Joint account for the marriage needs. That if there are things that we are specifically focusing on that's critical to the health of the marriage, then we have a joint account that services that.
Right.
All right. So couples can choose to keep separate checking accounts and start a saving accounts for vacation, down payment of home, kids' college. I think we did touch on that. So before we wrap up, we want to talk a little about setting financial goals as a couple. That is something that we have talked in times past in counseling with couples. We have talked to them about the importance of setting goals. Not just financial goals, but where would you want to be in 5 years? Where you want to be in 10 years? My wife and I have had this conversation several times about our age, about our season, and about the fruitful years we have left in terms of what we should be doing now. I was telling a friend of mine a few months ago that I'm preparing for retirement, and he said to me, "You're a young man." And I said, "That's when you prepare for retirement. You don't wait until you're about to retire then to start to prepare." So you have to think about, you have to think about, and I say to my sons all the time, it is better to have money and not need it than to need the money and not have it. So even as you plan, you have to have a plan, not just based on where you are, but you have to have a plan based on where it is you want to go. Because remember, and let's talk about retirement for a minute. One of the things about retirement that lots of people don't consider is when you retire, the bills don't go away. Usually, a lot of people retire with a mortgage. They retire and their health needs and those bills don't go away. Your health situation may not change. Your mortgage does not go away, and lots of people struggle with that. So you have to think about, how are you preparing yourself for those years, even in terms of how you are managing your finances as a couple. All right. So set financial goals as a couple. As you and your spouse decide on whether to establish a joint bank account or to keep separate bank accounts, you may find that it's wise to set financial goals together. All right. In either scenario. All right. So
And when having financial discussions, some questions you want to ask is, what will be the approach if we pay off the debt we accumulate together or separately? You know,
Yeah.
what would be
What's the approach we will take?
What approach will we take? You know, are we going to pay it off together, or are we going to pay it off individually? You know?
Yes, I think before you move on, I think one of the things about that is sometimes you have to think about, and I'm not a financial expert. I did economics briefly for a semester at university, but I'm not an economist. I'm not a financial person. My wife is an accountant. She is qualified in the field of accountancy, and she works in the banking industry for a while. She understands these things. That you have to think, for example, when you are dealing with debt accumulation, what a lot of people don't think about is the interest.
Yes.
Whether the interest is simple interest or compound interest, and how the interest impacts on the overall of what it is you're attempting to do.
Yes.
Because sometimes what happens is that we think we're going to delay payment on something, but over time,
Yes,
because of the accumulation of the interest. So those are things that you have to decide. Should we save? Should we save, or should we clear off this debt?
Right.
And I think that decision will be determined by issues like interest rates, and because you could be saving a lot of money, and on your savings you're getting a 3%. I don't know what the rates are at the commercial banks. Let's say you're getting a 3% or a 7% on your savings, depending on the account, on the savings account you have. But you have a debt, and that debt is accruing. There is an accumulation of interest that has a 12 or 15% rate of interest. That's not business. You're basically strangling yourself. It would be more appropriate to get rid of that debt rather than save. But there are some people who believe, no, well, maybe we should be saving. But then what's happening with your debt is that the debt is racking up because of the interest rate you are dealing with. All right.
Yeah.
So each couple should take a money personality test if you don't know each other's style. That's an interesting one. I would love to hear more about that, Fiona. A money personality test. Maybe we should talk some more about that. Maybe you should get you to come on and talk a little about that. I'm not sure how that works.
Yeah.
But in our family, my wife is a much better money manager than myself. And I think maybe it's because of her discipline working in the banking industry. But she manages finances better. In every family, you have to be able to have an appreciation of the strengths of each other. And sometimes we are not always comfortable with the decisions they make, because at times it may not always be comfortable for us. But one has to look at the broader picture of what it is we are attempting to do as a family, where it is we are attempting to go, and how do we ensure that the decisions we're making are economically sound. All right? So what are some of the other questions that they should be asking? So if we pay off our debt, accumulated or separately, what will be the approach we will take? For example, to investment. Are we going to invest? How much will we invest? How much of our saving? How much of our earnings will we invest? How much will we save? And those are very, very important questions as well. All right. How will regular household expenses be met, such as mortgages or utility or those very important things? How do we handle emergencies? Is there an emergency fund? Do we have monies put aside for emergencies? How much of our money can we assist relatives with? You know, do we have the means? And there has to be a discussion
on everything. On everything.
Absolutely, and an agreement on it.
And I think couples who prefer to have the finances separate so that they don't have to have discussions, so that they don't have to, they give who they want when they want and stuff like that. But, when you come together as a couple, you need to be able to share everything. So even though you may have separate accounts, you still need to discuss with each other how we're spending, what we're doing, who we're giving, who we're not giving, when we're not giving, and, so that, like you said, you have a financial plan for what you're doing with your monies, even though it may be in separate accounts.
Absolutely. So have detailed financial discussions with your spouse frequently to ensure that you are talking through the issues and that you are not making irrational decisions about how you're spending your money. And so, as one financial expert has indicated, says come up with a financial blueprint on an annual basis so that you can think about how you are spending and how you are budgeting. I remember talking when you and I were planning to be married. I was sharing this with my older son. When I was planning to get married to my wife, I sat down and I thought about what it will require for me to take care of another person. And at that time, I realized that I was totally incapable financially of having another one come into the relationship with me. And so fortunately, because of your own, career path and so on, you were working. And so we were able to collectively we were able to build, start a family, buy a home, and take care of our expenses adequately. But you do have situations where you do not have an opportunity for a joint income. And so even if you do have, I think the whole issue of how you are budgeting, that sometimes what a lot of people do is that there isn't a clear sense of, and we have not always been diligent in that respect either, as to how you are budgeting. This is what we are going to spend on this much this month. So sometimes what happens is that because there isn't a clear budget of what it is you are going to be doing on a monthly basis financially, then people usually find that having spent, then they look back at how much they have and realize that there are things that came up as an emergency that if you had budgeted it was not going to be an emergency, because a budget is a blueprint. It's a roadmap of what you intend to do with the resources that you have.
And of course, you don't have control over eventualities, things happening beyond your control.
Absolutely.
And you have to, and that is why it's important to also be saving, so that when you do have situations that you didn't cater for, didn't plan for,
absolutely,
you do have somewhere and some money to pull on,
Absolutely. I think this is not in our discussion, but I think one of the things that people struggle with is the whole issue of debt, good debt and bad debt. And so maybe another time when we do have someone who is an expert in this field, we'll talk about the whole issue of good debt, bad debt, because there's some debt that's good debt in the sense that it creates a capacity for expansion and increase and so forth. But one has to be able to weigh that out in terms of how much debt really is good debt, and how much debt or what kind of debt really constitute a bad debt in a relationship. So, like I said, it's very important to ensure that the discussion is taking place. And that if there's a plan in place, that there's an agreement on how we are going to work the plan. All right. So thank you so much for coming on tonight. Fiona has given us a link where we can go to find out about the financial compatibility, I think it is, and do this personality test in terms of your financial personality. Awesome. That's a good one. Fiona. So I'm going to probably put that link up. Or Fiona, you can maybe share that link to the page, and persons, you can take a look at it. We really appreciate that. Thank you all for joining us tonight.
Yes.
And we are going to join you again next Tuesday. Do remember to share this video if it has been a blessing to you.
Absolutely.
And remember to share the word. All right, and be intentional in your loving. I'm going to ask my wife to pray.
In your budgeting and spending.
And in your budgeting and your spending. Absolutely. And ask my wife to pray for everyone that's on tonight, and even for those relationships and so on.
Praise God. Heavenly Father, we thank you this evening that we can come before you. Here again, another opportunity, God, to learn, to share, and to grow, and to be better. We ask, oh God, that every person that is on tonight and shared and commented and just been a part of the discussion, that you will help, oh God, that you will help them in their own relationships and wherever they may be struggling, God, whether financially or otherwise, whether in their relationship as it regards to how they deal with their finances. We pray that tonight would have brought some clarity and some guidelines for those who may have difficulties, and that at the end of this, God, they'll be better able to manage their finances as a couple, and better be able to come up with agreements as a couple as to how they use their finances. Bless our viewers tonight. Bless those that join, God, and just continue to strengthen marriages, continue to strengthen relationships, God. We give you thanks for victory after victory. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen, and God bless you. For those
God
of you
bless.
from Kingdom Community International here in Kitchener that are watching us, do remember next week we are going to be having our family
Family week.
festival. All right,
Yes.
you can't afford to miss that. So pass the word around. Next week, beginning from
From
Sunday,
Monday.
from the 20th, from 21st, going all through the week, we are going to be having our family festival. And I want you to call the office if you need information about
Yep.
what we're going to be doing for the week. But we're going to be having some awesome things next
Happening.
week.
Sharing
Maybe
with
our program
families.
next Tuesday night, we're going to probably let you in on what we'll be doing in the kitchen. Not quite sure, but we have a special thing for next Tuesday
For
night
next Tuesday
for
night.
the
For
families.
families,
So we may
yes.
let you in a little on what we will be doing in the kitchen next Tuesday night. God bless you. Have a great week. See you next Tuesday.